Welcome, everyone. The first episode of Turn the Tide. The essence of this show is going to be discussing technology, philosophy, history, and general current events. The first essay that we're going to be discussing is actually by one of my favorite authors, Isaac Asimov. One of the essays that he wrote a long time ago was called Dangers of Intelligence. Let me read the first paragraph so you have an idea of what he's talking about. It is an indisputable fact that human beings dominate the earth. They can drive plants and animals to extinction without any difficulty, and they can change the face of the planet and alter the environment to suit their own needs and whims. No species of plant, or animal that has ever lived could ever begin to do these things in the way we can. And it is equally clear that these abilities are the result of intelligence. No other species of living thing on this planet has our kind of intelligence. I suppose that few people are willing to give up the general intelligence that human beings have, or are dissatisfied with our ability to establish this increased comfort and security for ourselves. But is intelligence really a good thing in the long run? Does it really help living things to survive? And this is the essence of the essay. And he goes on for a few pages. He takes human intelligence and talks about how chimpanzees, for example, while they are quite intelligent, because there's only about 1% or so of difference in genetics, it seems that they have become almost extinct, primarily because they are competing with humans for space. Then he goes on to compare the habitat and the way the rats live. And he goes on to say that if you want to compare chimpanzees and elephants with a truly successful species, consider the common rat. Now that's successful because they live amongst us, amongst humans, and yet have very little intelligence and can survive by the thousands in any place whatsoever. And he gives two really good reasons as to why that's the case. First, their dietary habits. Second, and most of all, their fecundity. Essentially, that they have many young and can quickly replace any losses. Now, this definitely makes you think a little bit about whether intelligence is that one key factor that helps you survive. He then goes on to compare the rats to cockroaches, who have even less of a brain and have survived for far longer, thrive better in almost every environment. So what is that differentiating factor? He answers the question by saying it is technology, the use of fire, elaborate tools, and new subtle inventions that make all the difference, not intelligence alone. So a lot of people, while we do focus on intelligence, that it is the key thing, but it's really the ability to make tools and invent things that really sets us apart. We are tool makers ultimately. Let's hear from the two guests that we have today, Omar and Anto, what they have to say.
It's interesting that you mentioned rats because oddly enough, this afternoon I killed a mouse at my place, and I was using a rat trap to get it, and this mouse was fucking all over the house, scampering for food, bro, scampering for food. And this motherfucker, I let him do it for the longest time, but you know what? He pissed me off the other day because he woke me up from my sleep. You know, he woke me up scampering on the stove, and I could see his tail enter the stove hole. You know, when you're cooking on the stove oven and you got like the ring and there's a hole. And so the guy, I know he's living behind the oven, right? And he's got his mouse family with him too. And, you know, I killed the son. I believe it was the son. I killed the son about 3 weeks ago. Some little guy, I hit him with a briefcase and just smacked him and threw him outside. This morning, I just whacked the dad. I think he was the dad or the mom. and it was a mid-afternoon rush. But these guys, anyways, to get to the source, to get to the bottom of it, you're right that these guys are intelligent creatures, and they will hustle for food. That's what these guys live for, is the food. And uh, and so it was a very interesting dynamic there, um, with the mouse and the intelligence part of them, right? So
Anyway, so the next thing is the next. Anto, did you want to add to that? Did you find anything interesting?
Overall, I just there has to go with the adaptation of evolution. So here's the question: is that um, basically you highlight the fact that it becomes more instinct than actually intelligence. So in this case, it's an animal's ability to be able to adapt to the environment, instinct, and that's what makes a lot of animals successful. However, with
uh-huh.
humans, our key way to be able to adapt is our brain. So you take a look at a rat, basically it's about numbers.
Right.
It's the fact that they basically work in numbers, they work in
Yeah.
colonies, and that is the essence of their success. Now, for us, is basically
Yeah.
our brains. Our brains basically led us to be able to adapt to our environment, to be able to communicate, to work as as groups. I think that's the reason why we're successful. So that's the idea, I guess, really behind it.
Right. I think I found the dietary component to be probably the most interesting
Yep.
one.
No, I agree.
Isaac Asimov actually brings up many interesting
The
guys. This
dietary
guy just
really.
is lost in his thoughts all the time. The dietary fact, the fact that they can eat anything from
Yeah.
anywhere and survive. I mean, yeah, of course, then you would survive. You can eat your own loved ones
Right.
and not feel guilty and continue thriving for thousands of years. But the distinguishing factor really is the development of technology. And just
Well,
to
and
add,
that's true, right? They carry so much disease that way.
can you repeat that? They
Uh-huh.
carry what?
Well, and that's why their vortexes, or what do they call it? They have so many diseases. They carry so much disease because they eat everything. They're eating everything all the time, and that's the Black Plague. It started that way as well. The mouse on the trade routes with the Mongolian Empire. They were allowed to eat the Chinese goods, and all that Chinese goods was rotten in the streets. And because their government didn't give a fuck about the people, and this was Genghis Khan, or Kublai Khan at this time, even later, it was even in the Yuan dynasty, almost after the collapse of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, and so 100 years after the fact, okay, the Black 1350 Europe, and because the Mongols opened up the world, it opened up the known world at the time. Some authors, they write it that it's the beginning of the known world. That those trade routes, the horses going 20 miles each outpost, they carried with them goods. They protected merchants, and those merchants, they carried with them goods, and they eat the rotten food. And next thing you know, Europe and in Venice, they're eating a bunch of their Chinese goods, because the world has been international since Roman times, man. Since Augustus the
Right.
emperor.
The next essay we're going to be discussing by Isaac Asimov is going to be called Little Things. After which, we're going to have a short discussion on the premise of it. About 100 BC in India, someone thought of hanging a loop of leather from each side of the saddle so that a big toe could be placed in each loop. This was the first toe stirrup, and it helped steady a rider on a horse. Considering that the horses had been around for almost 2,000 years, you'd think that someone would have thought about it sooner. The idea spread to China, where the climate was colder and people did not ride horses barefoot. About 400 AD, someone thought of expanding the toe stirrup into a metal loop large enough to hold a shoe, and this became the first foot stirrup. A little thing, yes, but what a difference it made. Because until then, a mounted warrior could thrust a spear only from a stationary horse. If a warrior made his thrust when the horse was moving or running, it would run right out from under him, and the rider would be thrown off. With the aid of the stirrup, the rider could hold himself firmly in the saddle, and the entire weight of the running horse would be behind the spear thrust. No foot soldier could ever stand against it. And as we know, that this eventually led to the Mongols conquering a lot of Europe, a lot of different lands in the Middle East, primarily because they were so good with horses, and because of minor technology changes like this. Another one that Isaac Asimov talks about is how the Mediterranean world had great soil, they had mastered agriculture, and they had led civilization around the world. However, at that time in Northern Europe, agriculture, as well as in general civilization, was not doing so well. So what ended up happening is that a lot of people tried using donkeys, horses, to plow the land, but it wasn't somewhere till for about 1,000 years after it was discovered in the East, which was a horse collar, which is essentially a padded ring of tough material that was placed at the base of the horse's neck and rested against its shoulders. So the horse would pull and the land would plow. Very small invention, a little thing essentially, and made a huge difference. It took 1,000 years from the East to make it all the way to Northern Europe, and then eventually led to a lot of wars because people wanted more land to till, and so on and so forth. But it's these little things that he's talking about, is that a small piece of technology can have such a crucial impact. And he really ends the essay by saying, where's the next little thing coming from? Will we recognize it as important when it comes? Will we be prepared for the great changes that may follow? And what about the dangers that are going to be coming?
When I was thinking about this, one really caught this article actually caught my attention. What basically comes to mind is necessity is the mother of all inventions. I think it's something that we've forgot in our generation. We just take all this technology as for granted, and it's funny because being in this pandemic, we have a whole paradigm shift. Everything that we know, all the technologies that we know, is now you hear a lot of terms like being repurposed and transformed. And so here you go, basically, necessity is the mother of all inventions. And so you take a look at that horse example. Right. It was a small little example of how just adding straps and the ability to be able to ride a horse transformed into multiple kind of factors. It became so easier so that the person could be able to take a horse, hook up a cart and bring it down to the market. And after later on it was able to be weaponized and to be able to use for like Roman armies or and you take a look at all these kind of things, you take all technologies, similar type of things happen. Omar.
Yep. Listen, the computer 20 years ago, like I whip through my keyboard. I'm unconscious about it when I'm whipping through my keyboard and I'm typing. I'm like, sometimes I go so quick, I'm like T1000 on that thing, man. I wonder if I have like aerobic strength, man, when I'm typing, because it's just so quick. But then compare that to like, someone my dad's age or your guys' parents' age, it's like they would be so slow at it and they haven't adapted to it. But I think what you're hinting at, Anto, is adaptation. These guys have adopted to their land, right? And they adapted to their environment. And so they just adjusted with the external world, which is always changing all the time, right? That's what all these religious thinkers are saying. That's what all the philosophers are always suggesting, that times change and times evolve. And as the times change, the external objects, they're changing as well. So one year it's a stirrup, the next year it's a brake pad on a jet when you're going to go bomb Yemen on a raid mission for Saudi Arabia, whatever war is going on out in the world, So, but the technology changes and people have to adapt, including the brain, the mind. The mind is this ethereal thing. Who's to say that the mind exists, right? That's what the ancients always say. Who's to say that the mind exists? You've never seen your mind. Ash, show me evidence for your mind. Anto, show me evidence for your mind. What's the only notion of the mind except for the arbitrary concepts and symbols that we attach to the mind? Otherwise, somebody dies in the Mongolian Empire and you got an army that's dead. No one's ever gone up to Kublai Khan and said to him, hey, Kublai Khan, we just raided Kravkov and I got this poleaxe head and I chopped it open his brain. And you know what? Here's the mind. Here it is of this man. It's impossible. It's never happened before. Even Einstein hasn't cracked that case, right? The mind doesn't exist, but we know that it exists because we give it names and concepts. But otherwise, we can't touch it.
Okay.
Anyways, that's what Buddhists 100%. And I'm sure the Brahmins, I'm sure it's in that same stream. But it's a good point. I wanted to pull up this one. I'm going on a tangent, and I'm just going to go on an extra tangent. Just real quick, I'm just going to throw up this quote here by this guy when you guys were talking about the Mongols, and I just found this guy, Abraham ibn Erza, right, from circa 1089 to 1161. So in that kind of time period, plague. This is in Spain. This is the height of the Islamic Golden Era, where science was really permeating the Arabian lands, and Europe was in the dark mist during its dark ages. And all the education went to the monasteries, but the Persians and the Arabs, they kept knowledge alive through science. They were experts in the optics. They were obsessed with the eyes and what the eyes could do. So Abraham ibn Erza, is the first Jewish thinker to deal with the problematic link between Saturday, and the Jews. He addresses the astrological association throughout his writings, both scientific and non-scientific. He removes the sin of embarrassing linkage by stressing that Saturn is actually conducive to a Jew's religious faith. In his long commentary on Exodus 13, Ibn Erza associates Saturn the fourth commandment, ordaining one to, quote, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy, unquote. That's Exodus 28. And explains that this correspondence allows the Jews, by not occupying themselves with everyday matters, by devoting themselves solely to the fear of God on this day, to protect themselves from Saturn's baneful influence, and also to improve the quality of their religious belief.
I'm just curious how you're tying
Saturn
this
had
up.
a very big effect on the world's atmosphere.
I'm just curious how you're tying this up to
Because we're talking about the world,
stirrup.
bro. We're talking about the whole entire world.
Okay, all right.
To the which? Sorry?
The horse-related story that I just mentioned.
How does it have to do with evolution?
Oh, because look, you're right. The Mongols were experts. The Mongolian warriors were experts horsemen. They were the top cavalry of the world during this time period, man. During the 13th century, the stirrup, I mean, come on, like everybody knows the formation of a Mongolian army, where they were on their horsebacks and they would use circular patterns of attack. Meanwhile, the Europeans, they were still in their columns, in their Roman columns. So you got this circular unit attacking these Roman columns who don't even have an extensive cavalry. Maybe they have them as auxiliaries, as Caesar would do, as the ancient style of Roman warfare would be, that you would send auxiliaries, horse scouts, who were usually equestrian class, who were like from an aristocrat family, because they could afford horses. So they would go and train, and they would be the scouts to see if there was any incoming armies coming up past the woods. And but that's as far as the enemy unit of a cavalry horseman would go. And it wasn't until the Mongols, even the Huns, but even some say the Huns is kind of like a phantom history.
All right. Well, that ends the two conversations about the two essays with Isaac Asimov. We have recorded a few other things, but after all of that, I've realized that we're going to be expanding two really important ones. One of them is going to be about the power of habits, how habits are formed. The other one is going to be actually about Carl Jung and his theory on shadows, and we're going to dive a little deeper into that. And another very interesting hot topic is going to be AI and how it's going to be molding our romance, our finance, our health in the upcoming episodes. I don't want to make one single episode that's almost 2-3 hours long. It'll be difficult to listen to, edit, and so on and so forth. But to keep it interesting, relatively to the point, we're going to split the topics up into a few different episodes, and let's see how that goes. Thanks a lot for listening. Leave your comments below. Thanks a lot.